Hi, I'm Alexandra Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of Cumberland Counseling Centers, and I'm a licensed clinical therapist. And in this training, we're going to be talking about how our early messages that we absorbed in our early families of origin, how those messages shape how we show up in relationships, how we can show up in our faith, and in how we see ourselves, and also how healing is possible. So what is a family of origin wound? Have you guys heard of that? Defined simply, it's the emotional blueprint we carry from the family we grew up in. Not just trauma, but the roles we played, the love we received or the love we didn't receive, and the messages we internalized. So some examples of this would be like the peacemaker who never learned to express anger, the achiever who was only praised when performing. This is something that is very near to me. So like the athlete or the dancer or the academic, only praised because of their performance. Or the helper who always put others first and doesn't, at this point, even know how to receive or ask for care. These are all roles that we learned or were given to us and told us that we had to live in from messages that we received in our family of origin. So what happens when those messages collide? So I want to share a personal story with you, and I'm going to read some of it so I don't forget kind of some of the ins and outs of this story. Growing up, I was covertly trained to believe that I was not good enough, strong enough, smart enough, etc., to trust my own decision-making ability. That was a very shaming, or I should say that there was a very shaming authority that would always criticize or belittle or scoff at decisions I made, and that it was always a moving target where I would never know what the response to me was going to be. So I didn't know if I would ever be praised. I pretty much always knew I would be criticized, but I didn't know what I would do. I didn't know what the response would be for what action I took on my own. It was completely baffling. It was like a mind game. This left me with an intense fear of disappointing authority figures and left me struggling for a long time with knowing that I can trust myself because I can trust my instincts and my Holy Spirit given wisdom. It took me a very long time to learn that I could do those things. Our spiritual beliefs and training can sometimes mask emotional wounds and even reinforce them. So here's a couple of examples that go with that example that I gave. Example number 1. Okay, I was covertly trained to believe my own instincts and my inner wisdom weren't trustworthy. I couldn't trust myself. I couldn't trust my gut, couldn't trust my instincts. This kind of messaging replaces self-trust with fear-based external control, often disguised as care, authority, or guidance. And many of us probably had parents or authority figures in our life who we knew loved us and had this kind of authority in our life. I have many clients who will sit down in a session with me and who will say, I'll ask them about their childhood and they'll say, I had a great childhood. I mean, very normal childhood. And then we'll get into it and realize that this is the kind of parenting they had, so intensely authoritative or authoritarian that they are in therapy at this point because they can't trust their own decision-making and they can't move forward. They're stuck in life because they don't know how to navigate interpersonal relationships or navigate the decision-making process to be able to move forward in life. So example number 2 from my own example that I gave earlier, having a very shaming authority who criticized, belittled, or scoffed at my decisions instilled chronic fear of disappointing others, right? So that's where people-pleasing comes in. In a spiritual context, this leads to equating God's voice with condemnation rather than love and guidance. And so many of us struggle with that. One thing that I often say is if the messages you received early on in life from the people that you should have known were the safest, that loved you the most, and that were saying the most true statements, if those people in your life pretty regularly, without realizing it, fed you lies, and they were parental figures, how can that not be translated into how you relate to your heavenly Father, a Father who loves you, a Father who would literally and did literally die for you? How can you not translate that over to that kind of father figure, that godly father figure, that he is probably also just as shaming as belittling, and is going to relate to you in that same way, right? That's big. That's why we also say, like, our mental health is the foundation from which we view everything. It's the foundation for how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to others, how we relate to God even. We don't want it to be, but it's true. And that's why our mental health and our spiritual health is just so incredibly intertwined. Okay, and so example number 3 here. The authority figure's responses were always a moving target, like I said, right? I never, ever knew where the bar was, what I would do that would lead to what response. Always a moving target. So this kind of unpredictability keeps a person emotionally off balance. It's a classic tool of coercive environments. And again, whether that person realized they were doing it or not doesn't really matter. Usually people who do this had this done to them early on in life and never realized it and never got that healing. That's what a generational wound or a generational curse even means. This unpredictability keeps a person emotionally off balance, and it makes it difficult to develop a secure identity in Christ because the rules for being acceptable are always shifting. Emotional manipulation masked as good parenting or as good leadership even just leads a person to develop chronic hypervigilance and self-doubt. And I am a 37-year-old mother of 2, and it has taken me about this long, maybe within the last 3 to 5 to 7, somewhere in there, years, to realize that that's what's been plaguing me, that trauma that has been a wall between me and the Lord. I've been a believer since I was 18 years old, and it has taken me this long to realize that that trauma wall is what has been keeping me between me and a deeper relationship with Jesus, who I know loves me. Do you see that? That's a lot of wasted time. And that's why we believe so deeply in the importance of therapy and therapy's connection with the church. God wants wholeness, not performance. And therapy is one way he brings that healing. Sometimes the messages we absorbed in our families, like be strong or don't feel too much or earn your worth with me, get tangled up with our spiritual beliefs. They just do. There's no way around it. But God doesn't ask for performance. He invites us into healing. At Cumberland Counseling, we often say that therapy is the most intimate form of discipleship because it's where we bring our full, unfiltered selves into the light. And when we do, God meets us there, not to shame us, but to restore us. So if you think about it, therapy is the most intimate form of discipleship because in that space, a person can talk about the messiest, woundiest, most disgusting, least charming, most fear-based parts of them that they probably wouldn't show anyone else, not even their pastor, not even their spiritual leaders. And that's why therapy or your relationship with your therapist has to be built on the utmost trust and respect for one another. And of course, you're going to have that with your spiritual leaders as well, but there's something different and dynamic about a relationship that you can have with a therapist. You can get into all of it with no shame, no spiritual manipulation, just raw humanity. And we can walk alongside you holding your hand to help you get through that trauma wall so that you can actually see Jesus clearer and see yourself, your imago Dei self, made in the image of God's self, clearer, because the trauma or the unhealed, untrue messages that were spoken over you that you've been believing all this time have been identified and removed. Does that make sense? Okay. So here's specifically how therapy rewires emotional patterns. When we grow up in emotionally unhealthy or chaotic environments, we develop coping patterns to survive. And that's an incredible thing. God designed our bodies, our nervous systems, our brains to to allow us to survive. That's a really cool thing. So these might look like, and you be like thinking about this, do any of these sound like you? And you can even like raise your hand a little bit. Or if you have a journal to take notes, be like, oh gosh, that's me. Some of these coping patterns to survive might look like shutting down in conflict. Or maybe like not even being able to hear what the other person is saying in conflict, or not being able to speak in conflict, or being able to gather your thoughts, opinions, or the things that you really need to say in that moment of conflict, shutting down. It might look like always needing to prove yourself. What is it that you need to prove, and to who? And when will you know that you've finally proved it? Is that you? Or it might look like feeling responsible for other people's emotions. Man, that's hard. And this comes up a lot in what we refer to as codependence, especially when people are struggling with any type of addiction. Feeling responsible for other people's emotions means I don't want them to feel that because they're spiraling, so I'm going to feel it for them and create a codependence so that they just rely on me. I'll feel it for them, and they don't have to do the work. Codependent. Or it might look like believing your worth is tied to performance, dancer here, or people pleasing, baby of the family, person who believed for a long time that I needed to be a certain person to keep everything together, right? Performance and people pleasing. So, I'm sad to say maybe I made this list because they all kind of reflected some part in me, and maybe all of us, and maybe you too. So take a moment, like jot some of those things down. If you're noticing, just let your ears perk and consider what that might mean. These patterns aren't random. They're protective strategies that once helped you feel safe or accepted. But over time, they can limit your relationships, limit your joy, and even your connection to God. Like I said earlier, your connection to God, your ability to experience His love for you, and even experience or understand who you are in God. So therapy specifically helps you name the pattern that you might not even be aware of in the first place, right? Almost, I would say like 80% of our clients come in and say things like, my childhood was great. It was a normal, healthy childhood. And they're stuck, or they're struggling, or they're in some sort of, abusive situation. But, they're stuck. They don't realize what this pattern is. So therapy can help them figure out what it is that's keeping them stuck, that pattern. And they might have some sort of epiphany like, oh, I go numb when people get upset with me. That's what's happening. Why do I go numb? What is happening in my nervous system that triggers danger to me when people get upset around me, right? And this is what your therapist can help you with. Therapy can also help you understand where it started. And usually it's in childhood experiences. And that doesn't mean you had a terrible childhood or terrible parents, but it does mean you experienced something that changed you. and that's okay. So it's either, it usually is a childhood experience or multiple childhood experiences or unmet emotional needs even to this day, right? So we can help you understand where that started. Therapy can help you learn new responses, like staying present in conflict and even how to do that. Setting boundaries and what boundaries are. Boundaries, that's a word that's being thrown out left and right everywhere. What are boundaries, and what are boundaries for me and my situation, and how can I set them to keep me healthy? Or asking for what you need and learning how to do that and what that sounds like in your voice, not someone else's voice. That's the kind of thing therapy can help you with. Over time, through insight, connection, and practice, all with that super trusted therapist in that sacred therapy space, through insight, through connection, through practice, your brain literally rewrites itself. It is such hard work, and no one is taking that lightly. The fact that your brain can rewire itself. This is called neuroplasticity, meaning your brain is designed like with plastic to change and heal and recreate itself. It's amazing that God designed our brains to do that. You build new emotional muscles and you start to live from a place of truth, not trauma. But that is not easy. That is like all the little neurons, little pathways in it's like taking a machete in a very heavy duty forest and carving a new pathway that you can very easily walk down that wasn't once there. It's really hard work. And that's why you need someone very consistent that you can trust to hold your hand to do it with you. We don't know what we don't know. And sometimes we need someone to walk us through that who just might know things differently or be able to see things differently than what you can see in your own life. So what healing can look like. We heal through safe relationships, always. I often say this is kind of a cheesy thing, but you can be sitting across from Freud himself, even though we kind of hate Freud. He was a quack. Okay, forgive me. But like the father of psychology himself. But if you cannot have a safe relationship with that expert clinician, healing just isn't going to happen. So it doesn't matter if you are meeting with the best therapist. That doesn't matter. We kind of have to get over ourselves with that. We need to meet with an expertly trained clinician licensed to do this work who is not going to hurt you or harm you in the process of doing this work. But they also need to be safe and trustworthy and non-judgmental and be able to hold you in this work, right? So we heal through safe relationships, therapy, truth-telling, naming the lies, which sometimes we don't even realize what they are, and inviting Jesus into the wound. And again, if we don't know what the wound is, then we can't do that. So a lot of times we, in Christian communities or in our, community groups or our closest Christian relationships, we'll say things like, just bring Jesus into that, you just got to get Jesus in there. But if we don't have the wherewithal or the insight or the training or whatever you want to call it to be able to name what that wound is, how are we going to bring Jesus in it, right? That's a very important thing for us to be able to talk about with each other. So here's how therapy can help rewire emotional patterns. I'm going to mention 4 therapies, just real briefly, some of the things that we like to do at Cumberland Counseling Centers. One is called IFS, which you might hear us talk a lot about, Internal Family Systems, IFS. One is just simply called Inner Child Work, which I love, or Narrative Reframing. And then the last one is EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. If you spend any time with me in like a clinical setting, you'll know how much I love the trauma therapy of EMDR. So I'm going to talk very quickly about some of these and why they could be so helpful. So I'll start with IFS, Internal Family Systems Therapy. IFS teaches that we all have different parts, like the perfectionist, the people pleaser, or the angry part. All these parts are trying to protect us based on past pain. They literally are saying, that was so painful. I never want you to experience that again. And I'm not going to allow it to happen. So they get really puffed up, really big, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep you from experiencing that pain. Therapy helps us listen to those parts with compassion, not to shame them, but with compassion and curiosity to find healing so those parts don't have to work so hard and they can kind of shrink back down, and then you can be centered in how you make decisions and how you go through life, rather than the angry part that's angry all the time, or the people pleaser part that makes themselves small. You just get to be you because you have identified the parts and healed them. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of meta, but it's really, really good work. Inner child work, okay, which I love working with the little kids, the little children, and the adults that I sit across from. Inner child work is sort of like this. Sometimes the reactions that we have as adults really come from the wounds we experienced as kids. Inner child work helps us connect with those younger parts of ourselves, offer them the care and the voice they didn't have then, and help them feel safe now. Doesn't that sound lovely? We can also sometimes call that reparenting ourselves. Ugh, it's just so beautiful. Reparenting ourselves specifically means learning to give ourselves the emotional support, boundaries, nurturing, and guidance that we may not have received consistently or healthily as children. So now that we're fully grown adults and we're healing, we're not perfect, we're all in process, but as fully grown adults and even as parents, for some of us, we can go back into some of those wounding experiences, and we can reparent that little child in us. Another thing that I say is, you are every age you've ever been. So even though I'm 37, I'm also still 6, I'm still 10, I'm still 15. And so I might need to go in my mind to that 6-year-old who was impacted negatively and has been carrying that. I might need to go to that 6-year-old and be the parent that I am today and parent her then the way that she deserved then, and just for whatever reason didn't get. And it's really special, sacred work. It's the process of becoming the safe, compassionate caregiver for yourself, the one you needed growing up, like I just said. Instead of letting old wounds or coping patterns run the show, like perfectionism, people-pleasing, or being self-critical all the time, reparenting helps you respond to your needs with understanding and care, the way every little child deserves. Okay. Narrative reframing. What I mean by that is many of us live by a story that was written for us. One thing for me is like, Alex, you are a lot. When you enter a room, you are too much. Tone it down. Or maybe the story that was written for me is, I don't matter. In this space, you do not matter. Or I have to hold it all together. All these feelings that you have inside, don't let anyone see, because that's too much, right? It goes back to that. Narrative reframing helps us rewrite that story in light of truth, grace, and healing. We stop letting pain define us, and we start living into who we really are. And the way that we can do that, another therapy style that we can use to do that is one of my favorites, like I said, which is EMDR. EMDR therapy stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. And that sounds real crazy, and I get it. And it is not real crazy. It's actually super simple. It is not voodoo or hypnotism. I promise it's actually very simple. And it's just working with the way that the brain was designed to heal itself. It's a type of therapy that helps people heal from painful memories or trauma. It works by helping your brain reprocess those upsetting experiences so they don't feel as intense or overwhelming anymore. So for me, I mentioned that I really do have a sort of a fear of authority in a way. Not so much anymore, but my brain, my nervous system, without me having to tell it to do anything, when I am faced with an authoritative situation, I get really nervous and anxious, as if a wild animal that could be dangerous to me just entered the chat, just entered the room, right? I'm not in control of it. I'm not cognitively aware, but I start breathing a little heavy. I get a little bit more emotional, like I can cry a little bit easier just because an authority figure is approaching me. So what EMDR can do is actually help me tap into where that originated from and can make it so that the intensity of the pain that my body experiences, first of all, we have to figure out where it came from. Why is there an intense pain associated with authority? And from what I shared with you, it kind of makes sense. And by reprocessing those sometimes very specific memories and experiences of authority that was a little bit scary or manipulative maybe, by sitting in it and reprocessing it with a trained therapist in EMDR, it will desensitize and bring down the pain level in my body so that when I am in a room with an authority figure or having to have a conversation or something like that with an authority figure, it doesn't feel like a bear just walked in the room. It just feels like something that I'm aware of my body is going to react to, and it can naturally feel a bit calmer rather than getting stimulated for seemingly no reason at all. Does that make sense? So it's helping your brain reprocess upsetting experiences so that they don't feel as intense or overwhelming anymore. The memory that we're going to sit in and reprocess doesn't go away. It's still there. It still happened. It still makes you who you are, but it loses its emotional charge, like I said. And you can think about it without feeling stuck or panicked or ashamed. That's what EMDR does. And it is the coolest thing. It's not even talk therapy. We're not even like talking through it. You're just letting your brain heal the way it was designed to heal. And there's more to it. It actually includes tapping or letting your eyes move side to side, crosses over your bilateral stimulation. Look into it. Do a little research. It's very cool. But it's a very effective trauma therapy. So you don't have to stay stuck in those old scripts. Oh, you don't want to be 37 and just in the last, 3 to 5 years figuring this stuff out. And I'm just kidding, because there's always time, and healing is always an appreciated, invited friend, right? You can be any age. And that old saying that our parents like to use against us where they say, I can't go to therapy, I'm too old, everyone knows you can't teach old dogs new tricks. That is false. And there's a lot of neuroplasticity is in the brain forever. So that's not true. You can be 70, go to therapy, and receive a lot of healing. Your story doesn't end where it started. You just have to talk through it. You can't get over something that you haven't allowed yourself to go through. So let us have the honor, please, of being able to go through it with you. If you're interested in getting connected with one of our therapists here, all you have to do is just go to Cumberland Centers with an S at the end, .org and make an appointment. And we're here for you. You are not too much, or whatever that negative message is that you believe about yourself. You're not too much. You're just enough. And you're definitely not alone. So come, let's get started.